Good afternoon. It's 12:30. Welcome to HorsfieldMenzies' latest webinar, lunchtime webinar. I'm Angus Menzies. I'm one of the founders and partners here at HorsfieldMenzies. I'm joined by Simon Horsfield, the other founder and partner, and by Chris Dias, who's our speaker today on immigration. Some of my colleagues are joining as well. We've got Joanne Alvey, who's joining us, and others may join as they're able. A number of people have signed up, haven't been able to actually make the event, but we are recording this, so you know, and also we will send out that recording or the link to the recording, and also the slides after the event for those who've not been able to join us live. But thank you to those who have, and obviously if people join on the way as we're going, then we'll just admit them as they join. So today we're hearing from Chris. It's the topic of immigration. It's the third in our series of lunchtime webinars this winter. If you missed the others, they're available also on our website and on LinkedIn. The first one was an employment webinar in relation to the latest government strike busting measures or proposals, and then the last one that we did was an employment tax webinar with David Chandler, and this is the third in the series, third and final one in the series on immigration. And I think I mentioned previously I used to do both immigration and employment law, and very soon found out that trying to stay up to date in both of them was nigh on impossible, certainly for me. So it's always good to have a specialist, and Chris is certainly a specialist in immigration. He's got over 20 years experience of working in this field. Immigration, it's still a minefield, I find, but there's certainly opportunities there for those businesses who are ready, willing and able to take them. I think they need the right information and the right support, but it seems to me to be clear that notwithstanding the shortage in our workforce at present, there's real opportunities there, and for those who are willing to dip their toe in the water of bringing in people from abroad. So today we're hearing about scale-up visas and global mobility visas, and without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Chris. If you've got any queries as we go through, pop them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end, and we'll make sure that those questions are answered. But for now, sit back and enjoy listening to Chris. I'm going to hand over to you, Chris. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much, Angus and Simon, for inviting me here today. I've done a few of these webinars over the years with HorsfieldMenzies, and I've always found them to be very productive, and you know, they bring up interesting topics because immigration is always changing, unfortunately. So what they invited me to talk about today is the scale-up worker visa first. So this is an unusual visa because it has advantages and disadvantages, and it's sometimes a bit, you know, hard to get your head around this type of visa. What is the Home Office trying to achieve with this visa? So I'll go into the advantages. So the first thing is that as a sponsor, so you need to get a different sponsor license. It's not the normal sponsor license for skilled workers that you need. You need to reapply to the Home Office for another license. But once you have that license, the supposed advantages of it are that you only have to sponsor a worker for the first 6 months of their permission to come to the UK, and obviously there'll be a less cost involved in that with visa fees, etc. The visa that they get themselves is a 2-year visa to come into the UK, but your sponsorship duties and record keeping only cover the first 6 months. You can continue to employ the worker for the whole of their time in the UK, but they become self-sponsored after the first 6 months, and so that has greater flexibility. As you know, for example, you could change them for different roles within your organization without having to notify the Home Office or necessarily apply for a new certificate of sponsorship. And you can change their salaries. You know, for example, like as you all know, that there's a minimum salary for skilled workers. And for each different occupation code, the Home Office set out what these going rates are. After the first 6 months, you're no longer bound by that for scale-up workers. And also, the Home Office have committed themselves that because it's a scale-up worker visa, it's for scaling up businesses. There's no limit on how many workers you can apply for, and they're not going to, in theory, block your way in if you ask for a lot of workers, as long as they think you can afford it. The disadvantage of this is that, number one, as I said, you need to apply for a separate license. For the sponsorship, you have to show minimum salary of 33,000. But obviously, again, that your sponsorship only lasts for the first 6 months, but obviously you'd have to sign a contract, etc. The other disadvantage is that because you're only tied to the worker for the first 6 months under the rules, the same goes to them. They're only tied to you for the first 6 months. So potentially they could jump ship after 6 months. After you brought them in, you come to the all the expenses of bringing them to the UK, but then it depends, on your relationship with them, I suppose. But this is a potential hazard of this visa. And the other thing is that because it's for a fast burst of growth to help a company scale, the visa, the license itself lasts for 4 years and it cannot be renewed. So they expect you that after that 4 years of having a scale-up visa, you would go back to the normal system of skilled worker visas. So again, it's a brand new thing that only came out last year. Nobody has reached that 4-year point yet. But it would be interesting to see if the Home Office changed their mind about this renewing, if it does take off and companies find it popular and want to use it. There are some extra conditions for obtaining a scale-up worker visa from the normal skilled worker application process. And so you have to show an annualized growth of at least 20% for the previous 3-year period. And it has to be based either on your staff count, your employment, or your annual turnover. And the Home Office will check these things. It's not up to you to present it to them. When you apply, they can check this themselves by looking at your staff records at HMRC, and also your tax returns. So there's no cheating on that, unfortunately. Scale-up worker visa terms, as I hinted to earlier, the initial visa is for 2 years, and then can be extended up to 5 years. The important thing to note is when it comes to extending the visa, the employer does not have to take any part in the application because it's called a self-sponsored route. So you sponsor the first application and the worker sponsors themselves to renew, which is quite interesting. They have to just show that they're working and earning enough money at the point when it comes to renew the visa, and they'll get another 3 years. And then when it comes to 5 years, again, they self-sponsor to get permanent status in the UK. So this is a quite good one for workers' point of view. If they are confident that they're going to earn a salary and be able to sponsor themselves, because then they don't have to rely on any costs apart from the very first one. And it also allows, in fact, let me just say this now, all the visas we're going to talk about allow partners and children to come to the UK, but out of the other visas that we're going to talk about under the global mobility route, this is the only one that leads to settlement. The others are all temporary visas, although they allow you to stay for up to 5 or 6 years. This is the only one that allows you to settle in the UK. So it's important to note from a worker's point of view. This is potentially a lot more attractive to them. Excuse me. So that was the scale-up visa. Now we're looking at what's called the global business mobility route. And it was introduced around the same time as the scale-up visa. And there's a number of different categories under this. But again, GBM, Global Business Mobility, you have to apply for a separate license in order to use any of these visas. It doesn't come pre-packaged with your skilled worker visa license. Excuse me. The difference is that unlike the scale-up visa, once you get the license, you get it for 4 years again, like all licenses, but you can continue to renew it every time. There's no limit on how long you can hold this. I'm sorry, guys, I'm just recovering from a bit of a cough, so I'm going to have to drink a lot of water today. So the first one is the graduate trainee visa, and this is pretty much as it says on the can. You know, it's for graduate trainees. The people who are going to benefit from this are larger companies that have graduate trainee programs, but potentially graduate trainee programs that send the graduates to different offices around the world, and the worker would be sponsored for an initial period of 12 months to do their assignment on the program in the UK, but it can be extended up to 5 years. So that's quite flexible there. However, once you hit the 5-year period, the worker can no longer stay in this category. So either changing to a different category or they have to leave the country. And the 5 years on this does not count towards a settlement. So for example, you can't spend 2 years on a graduate trainee, then move to skilled worker. You'd have to start the 5 years again on the skilled worker visa. But again, you can bring partners and children to the UK. But again, the partners and children are restricted in the length of time they can stay in the UK. It's still 5 years, they're tied to the initial worker. The next category is the secondment worker, which again is designed for the larger companies that have different offices internationally and want to send workers from one office to another on temporary assignments. And again, as with the previous visa, a temporary assignment can be anything between 12 months to 5 years. So not so temporary, really, but you get the initial visa for 12 months, and then it has to be extended with sponsorship if you want to keep the worker for more than 12 months. But again, very crucially, there's no expectation of permanent settlement on this visa. But family and partner and children can still accompany the worker on this visa. This one, senior or specialist worker visa, and this is again for assignments in the UK, but because it's for senior or specialist workers, the salary requirements are much higher, 42,400 per annum. So that's something to bear in mind. This is I don't see this one being too popular because of that. I mean, it would actually be cheaper to bring somebody over on a skilled worker visa, I think, because of the minimum salary requirements, unless they are a very senior worker in your organization, and unless you actually only want them to come for a temporary period of time and they don't want to settle in the UK. Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend this visa, really. And this is a new one, a service supplier visa, this one is called. So this is where, for example, I came across a situation where a construction company had a project. They used to, bring over their specialist workers as contractors from Europe. And suddenly they couldn't do that anymore because free movement has stopped. So I had somebody who they wanted to bring over 100 plumbers to work from Europe, and there was no way to do it under the rules. Under this rule, you can do it. So they don't actually have to be your workers. You can take responsibility for these workers if it's a project you're working on and you're bringing them in for a temporary time to work on that project, as long as you're willing to take that responsibility for them during the time that they're in the UK. So I think that, especially with European workers, this is it was brought in to fill that hole for self-employed workers who were able to use free movement beforehand. And I don't know about the take-up of this, because again, it's a hard one for companies to get their head around, that you're sponsoring someone who's not working for you. But I think as time goes by, this one might become more popular, especially for big projects. And the last one we're talking about today is an expansion worker visa. This used to be the sole representative of an overseas company visa, and it was very popular for small companies or medium-sized companies to send somebody to the UK to set up a branch office. The Home Office were finding that that was being abused by people, so they've now brought in it under the sponsorship system, where it is the only system at the only visa at the moment where you get a sort of a temporary license. So the employer who is based abroad has to apply to the UK for a temporary license in order to sponsor people to come in as expansion workers. And so it does require some sort of preparation in the UK, but minimum preparation. So you set up the company, you maybe set up a bank account, maybe you've taken an office, but in order to prove that you are serious about this worker coming to the UK. And then this worker can come to the UK. And in fact, I think you can sponsor up to 5 workers to come to the UK under this visa. So it's a bit more flexible than the previous one. The visa itself does not lead to settlement in the UK, unlike the skilled worker. But the point of it is that the worker comes in, sets up operations, and then can convert the license to a skilled worker visa, wherein even the expansion workers could then potentially switch over to the skilled worker visa. So that's how the Home Office are playing that one. And certainly it has killed off a lot of applications who were planning to come as sole representatives. But for the more established companies, I think that it's not going to get in their way. If they want to set up in the UK, they will follow the rules and go down this route. Okay, so as we can see, that the new visas all have a separate purpose, but I think it's disappointing overall that they don't lead to settlement, because you're not going to get so much engagement from people to sacrifice up to 5 years of their life and then have to leave the UK. So I think that the skilled worker visa overall is still a better visa to have, but for different circumstances, for different projects, then it's better to have access to all of these types of visas. But that could potentially mean that you would have 3 licenses. You'd have the skilled worker license, the scale-up worker license, and the global business mobility license. But certainly it's possible to do that. And if you look at the sponsor register, and not a lot of employers, especially the really big ones, have already applied and they've got the licenses in place. Okay, so thanks a lot, guys, for hearing me out. And if there's any questions, please do let me know.
Thanks, Chris. Really, really useful. I've got a few questions. Certainly, you mentioned, you may have companies who have employers who have to actually have potentially up to 3 licenses. How much do these licenses cost, and how long do they take to get them?
The licenses themselves, if you're a small employer, are not that expensive. You're looking at about £560 for each license. If you're a larger employer, then it's double that. But as I said, once you've paid the license fee, you've got the license for 4 years. Okay. But unfortunately, with the Home Office, it's not as transparent as that. There's lots of other costs down the line. When you're issuing certificates of sponsorship, when you're paying for visa fees, when they're paying for health surcharges. So there are costs along the way. It does rack up.
I mean, you've mentioned ultimately several different kinds of routes to the UK. The scale-up license certainly seems to me to be more attractive, certainly to employees, but potentially also to employers as well, with the flexibility that it offers and the fact that you've only got to sort of sponsor the individual for 6 months, and then you don't have all those sponsorship obligations that you have when you're sponsoring, for example, a skilled worker throughout their time as a skilled worker. You say the employers can have the scale-up license for 4 years, and obviously it's brand new, so we don't know what happens after 4 years. But so your understanding at the moment, am I right in thinking, is that currently it's a one-off? Once you've everybody can have a chance at a scale-up visa, but they can't keep getting scale-up license, but they can't keep getting scale-up licenses. You've got your 4 years to scale up, and if you don't manage in that time, we think then you've missed the boat. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you've got to time it well, so that you can use it to its fullest. But what we don't know is, because it's a new visa, the government, can quite easily change its policy if there's enough demand from employers and the Business Migration Commission as well.
Yeah.
To give them their recommendations. So there is potential for change there.
Yeah, and one of the
at the moment it is capped at 4 years.
Yeah, one of the criteria you said was 20% growth year on year for the last 3 years, and that's something which the Home Office can check itself through through tax returns and things. But what if they don't have 20%? Each of those last 3 years, but they do have 72.8%. I think I did the maths right, which would be the sort of compound percentage increase. So if from year one they're at, I don't know, 10 million, and at year 3 they're at 17.28 million turnover. I was going to say 17.2 or 17.28 people, because I didn't realise there was a headcount opportunity as well. But would that count, or is it the government would just say, well, that's not good enough?
Unfortunately, no. They do insist on the step, the three-year step.
And perhaps that's just to
have a minimum of 20% each of those years. Growth can be bigger than that, no problem. But if even in 1 year it's lower, then you have to start your 3-year step again.
And I suppose that guards against those businesses, and we've all seen them, which have meteoric sort of growth over the space of 1 year, which turns out to be a house of cards. They're looking to see that consistent growth, I suppose. That makes sense. But it still means, doesn't it, it seems to mean that because there's no limits on the number of workers, you could effectively hire a whole cohort of scaffolders from Poland or Lithuania or anywhere, or India, Australia, US, if you wanted, and bring over a whole gang effectively. Is that right?
Yeah, I think if during the course of the license, the Home Office noticed that you were bringing a lot of people in, but then they were leaving you, I think they would want to do an audit and find out what's going on. Why are you not retaining that staff? I think if it was just a normal churn of staff, fine. But if it looks like there's some sort of immigration scheme going on, they'll quickly clamp down on you.
And I wonder whether this would fall into that. Say you had because you only have to keep them at that contract, say the 33,000 for 6 months, I think you said. Could you then, in theory, you could agree to bring people over on a contract that was 33,000 per annum for 6 months, and then reduce to 25,000, for the next 3-4 years?
Well, they'd have to then supplement their income, because they have to keep their salary, at the right level to renew their visas.
The individuals do, but it wouldn't be the owner side. Yeah. So they could have a sideline going on, effectively, couldn't they?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. I mean, so for example, and that's the other flexible thing. Once the 6 months are up, you can change the hours, because there's minimum hours for skilled workers at the moment.
Right. Okay. So you could bring them over at 33k full time, and then reduce them to part time on 25k in theory.
In theory, yeah, you could. Yeah. I mean, whether they agree to that or not, or and also bear in mind, yes, you're no longer responsible for the person, but if you had bad feedback to the Home Office, someone made a complaint, it could jeopardize the license. So because when the Home Office revoke a license, there's no appeal process. I've seen some very arbitrary decisions that have no legal basis. Then you have to take them to judicial review to get them to give you your license back, which can be quite costly. So I think approach it with caution.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think whilst it's flexible for employers, there's clearly the opportunities for, I suppose, manipulative employees to look at this and think, well, hang on, I could get myself, not settled in the legal sense of the word, but I could come over and under one of these visas, and then after 6 months, find something else potentially. So employers would just have to look out for that, I guess.
I think you just need to look at it from the point of view that the reason it was designed was for you to be able to hook best employees when you need them, and then you don't necessarily have to keep them once the business has reached a certain stage, or once you might have only needed those skills for a few months, for example. So it gives you that flexibility, and that's why the Home Office will put it in there. They haven't put it in there really for the benefit of the employees. They put it in there for the benefit of the scaling business.
And I mean, I think the record keeping is obviously going to be very interesting, isn't it, to see how how businesses do retain people they bring over under one of these visas, particularly.
I mean, to me, if someone comes over and they're good at their job, and you've gone to this effort, the likelihood is you're not going to replace them.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I think also the scale of visa is obviously more attractive in many ways, but I guess it also runs the risk, just thinking of the sort of politics of the situation, it runs the risk, doesn't it, of doing the opposite to what the government's trying to do in terms of reducing net migration, because it leads to settlement.
Yeah, I mean, it does lead to settlement, but I think that the take-up of this visa is just a drop in the ocean, really. So I don't think this visa in itself will make any difference.
Just on that, I mean, obviously the sort of right from David Cameron saying, he wanted to reduce net migration to tens of thousands back in whatever it was, 2011, 12, something like that, to last year, I think we saw actually net migration was at record levels. Do you see anything in what's happening here which is likely to do what the government's stated aim was around sort of reducing net migration? Obviously, all the global mobility visas aren't leading to settlement, so that in the short term, if they are taken up, it's not going to have that long-term impact because they don't lead to settlement.
Exactly, because then they'll have to change or go back home at some point.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I don't. If you're looking, at my personal opinion on this, based on the rules, I don't see how we'd ever be able to get it down to those levels, because we have the labour needs in the UK. So, and the fact is, the government have stopped the Europeans coming, who were the ones who were filling these gaps. So we have to fill them somehow.
Very interesting. One thing I was going to ask also, because obviously I think it's good that we have these opportunities, as you alluded to there, and I mentioned earlier, there's this shortage in the workforce in a number of areas, and this seems to at least give some opportunities to try and stimulate growth and recruitment. But what about there was something about right to work checks which I sort of came across my feed a couple of, I can't remember how long ago now, but where do we stand currently on right to work checks? Have they become easier, or I know they were relaxed during pandemic, but what's the latest?
No, they've gone back now. So, I mean, you don't necessarily have to do the check in person nowadays, but you need to check the document. So, for example, if you want to check a passport and the person can't come to you, then they have to send it to you by courier or by special delivery. And then you do a video conference with them. They're here, I'm here, I have the passport, and I check it, with them being online. So it's probably simpler to just meet up in person. But if people are working from home, that's why the Home Office have that compromise.
I see.
So and what about, you've still got to check to have the document in your hand.
I see. Yeah. And one thing also I wanted to just sort of touch on briefly is a lot of employers are turned off because they just they do see immigration as a minefield, and certainly they don't want to get involved in sort of sponsorship because they know that there's lots of sponsorship duties. But I mean, what are the main sponsorship duties? Because are you able to sort of offer some comfort that it's not quite the sort of the prohibitor on recruitment that many employers seem to think it is?
It's not too bad, really. I mean, yes, you have to have a copy of the ID, but they're phasing that out. There's now the online right to work checks, where you get a share code and you can just check it that way. And I think by the end of 2024, all cards are going to be phased out, and it's just going to be online right to work checks. So that should make it much, much easier for people to confirm these things, and then you'll be able to just print out straight from the computer the right to work check.
Okay, well, I mean, that'll be good.
So the Home Office IT system seems to be catching up finally. That's my read about it. Yes.
Well, not before time. We've got a question in, one which hopefully you can help. So you mentioned that as a graduate trainee, at the end of 5 years, you have to change to another category. And the question is it the graduate trainee themselves that have to do that, or can the sponsor, the employing sponsor, can they manage that for?
Help, for example, if they've got a license as a for skilled workers, they can sponsor them if they want to.
After the end of 5 years.
Or any time in between.
Or any time in between. So they could switch in country at any time during that 5-year grad visa into a skilled worker and start the process of building towards settlement.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So I mean, it's not. It is quite flexible, I suppose. Sometimes I think
the important thing to note is that there's some visas that you can combine to make the 5 years, but on these visas, the ones on the global business mobility, you can't combine them. So you're starting the 5 years again.
Yeah, understood. And do you? Well, I suppose, yeah, as you mentioned there, that a lot of the European workers have now gone back to their countries, and
what I'm finding is that a lot of the sponsorships that we're getting, are at the moment are for European workers anyway. It's just, so they're still coming in, but they're not coming in as sponsored workers.
That was going to be my question. Yeah, and particularly it seems to me that the scale up visa in particular seems to be something which could enable employers to go back to that pool of skilled Polish construction workers or Lithuanian construction workers, or I don't want to stereotype any particular nationality, but the reality is we have a shortage of people who have the skills and the willingness to do some of these skilled jobs, and it was being met by European workers for a long period of time. But it sounds as though this actually could enable those employers to go to the extent they haven't already, to go back to that pool and bring them across.
I think anyone who has experience of the skilled worker visa knows that it can be a bit slow. Especially last summer, it really slowed down because of the effect of Ukraine. Just sometimes you're waiting up to a month to get just an allocation. But the point of the scale-up visa is that it's supposed to be less scrutiny by the Home Office. So we'll have to wait and see whether it does have a significant speeding up effect compared to skilled worker visas.
And the pricing you mentioned too, it certainly seems a lot less than the figures, the thousands of pounds that licenses have cost in the past, I think. And is that because it's it is focused, it's not focused on the massive businesses that are massive already, it's focused on those that are probably quite small to medium sized now, but who have a good business model and a good ambition to grow.
Exactly,
yeah.
But that's not to say that existing businesses can't benefit from it, as long as they meet that 3-year step criteria.
Yeah, which, and the bigger you are, the harder that is to show, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, really useful. Thank you for that. Just see if there's any other questions. There's no others. I mean, if anybody wants to pop a question in the chat now, feel free. If anybody wants to speak up and ask a question, feel free now. Otherwise, we're going to bring things to a close. I'll keep an eye on that for now. But otherwise, just thank you, Chris. Really appreciate you coming on again and giving us the benefit of your wisdom and experience. And your details are there on the screen if anybody needs to contact you. As I said, this is being recorded. We'll aim to send it out to all those who registered, along with the slides, and at the same time, it will be on our website and on LinkedIn. And as I said, I mentioned at the start, there's the other webinars in the series are also available on LinkedIn and on our website as well. And if any queries arise in relation to any of these webinars or anything else relating to employment law, immigration, or anything related to the workplace, and you've got any queries that you want to raise, do get in touch, and we'd be happy to help out. Otherwise, thanks for joining. I don't think there's anything else that we need to mention. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys, for listening.